I was born on the 10th of September 1913 near the town of Vrede in the Free State, which lies almost on the border between the Free State and the Transvaal, and it's actually near what we call Standerton. But my parents were born and in fact living near Harrismith, and I was lucky, because my family was lucky, because, in fact, I can say I was lucky because both my paternal and my maternal grandparents were well-to-do people. I'm so that now I can say that I do not come from a poor surrounding or poor families. Now, they were so well-to-do that because they were both farmers and also traders. When I say farmers now, they had large herd of cattle and flock of sheep, and then they used to farm, especially produce large quantities of wheat. They were traders because now they were engaged also in transport business. Now at that time, when they were still young, they used to transport goods from the coast, for instance, from Durban to the mining centers like Kimberley. And then my father then was the man, was in charge of that trade, so that he was the one who was driving the span of his father to carry out this business. And so they became quite well-to-do. This went on well until, of course, after the Boer War, more or less, or just before or during the Boer War, because now then they developed a large number of poor whites surrounding that area, and then they became envious of the wealth of our grandparents. But I must point out that now it was not only my grandparents, but black people, our Africans around that area, were fairly well-to-do and independent. Now, then they started complaining about them, and then, of course, organizing, and then the governments turned on our people, and then they caused them now to leave the area. Now, that was the beginning of their being underdeveloped. If you can imagine now, people who had such large flock of sheep and big herd of cattle, and that trading business, you see, when they were uprooted, you see, it was beginning now. It was the beginning of their impoverishment. Now, by the time they reached the place where I was born, much of their wealth had been depleted. Now, then at about that time, you see, especially when I was born, it was now after the British government had conquered the entire Azania, or if am I to use its colonial name, South Africa. And then that is everybody there, including that is now the Dutch or the Boer imperialists or colonialists, that of the Free State and the Transvaal, fell under the colonialism and imperialism of England. We had Milner now then, who was trying now to coordinate all this. Now, as our grandparents now lost, the farming rights, now that is now, especially after the union was formed, that union which brought about the joint imperialism of the British and the Dutch, then they decided that now they should acquire land themselves. And then fortunately, around about that time, we had in Azania a young lawyer who was trained both in America and in England, and Presley, in the name of Presley Gaseme. And then he organized land syndicate, and then our grandparents, my grandparents, both ways, that is paternal and maternal grandparents, bought land in Dakakral. That is where I grew up. That is where I attended primary school until I passed standard 5, when I went to Natal, where I studied now. I attended school under a mission, Anglican mission school, which was called St. Chet's. But now I was in the primary school, which was called St. Beats. But the boarding school was the same. We just mixed. Those were training for teacher training and other students. Now I've completed my primary education at St. Beats, at St. Chet's, where later on, then after I passed in standard 6, I went to St. Peter's, Rosettenville, where I did my high school, that is from Form 1 to Form 5. And then from there, after a short, in fact a year break, I went to Adams College, where I did my teacher training, and then, which was a post-matric course, which offered, teaching, that is now teacher training, plus 3 degree courses. And now that was my early education. Now you can see that now the background. Now the background. Now I grew in Dakakral. You see that I think I should mention besides schooling, because that area became very small for the wealth of my grandparents. And actually, as I grew older, I saw their wealth, being depleted, even their cattle dying, and their sheep dying one by one, you see. So now I saw the process of underdevelopment, so that economically, I am 100% animal of underdevelopment, you see. The very fact that now, well, of course, I never worked for a white man. In that sense, you see, in spite of it all, they managed to educate me and to resuscitate us. Even during the Depression, we lived better life than many people there, including the so-called white farmers there. In fact, my home was a sort of a place where many people came to get food, you see, because of our plots there. Well, I met my wife, uh, personally first, at St. Peter's, where she had come with the school children to play against, to play hockey against our school. So that is where I first met her personally. But, my wife was a woman or a girl who was very popular in the Western Township and Sophia Town. Then at St. Peter's, I had very many young St. Peterian, people, students from Sophia Town and Western Native Township. So they used to talk a lot about her, you see, and then because she was a sports girl, musician, even in class she was not bad. She was an all-rounder, and then also a good debater.
But I also heard that she was in a choir.
Yes, that's what I'm saying, musician. That's why I said musician. Now, at that time, while at school choir and all that, the choir that comes much later. I mean, that's what I mean is that when I first met her. But now I made even stronger acquaintance as we were now, as we met in debates, especially at the University of the Witwatersrand. There was what was called Sigma Club, which used to organize debates. So now, I used to lead a team from St. Peter's, and she was in a team which came from the university itself. So now we actually met there in debates. So that's how now I actually made further strong acquaintance with her. And then, of course, after qualifying as a teacher, well, we taught at the same place that is in Orlando East. And then we were doing exactly the same thing. She was conducting a choir at St. Mary's, which was one of the, in fact, it was the best choir in Orlando because it won every year competition in the primary school. And then I might mention now that now it costs a lot of, well, what can I say, misunderstood or even a bit of jealousy among the male teachers there, because she was the first woman to conduct, choir, senior choir, and they felt that now St. Mary's had no business to ignore male teachers and put up a woman there to conduct it. Well, I was at Orlando High School, then I was conducting the senior choir of Orlando High School. Well, I cannot say much because I was doing, but it was one of the choirs which also won many competitions too. So we were doing the same things too with my wife. We've always done the same thing. Of course, ever since, her life really has been music. She's been in many choirs. Well, among which now was the Ionian Choir, which was conducted by Ngoma. And then, now above all, now she's running her own children's choir, which is the Nightingale. And then she's very much interested in the children's choir. And then she is also a writer, and she writes mainly in poetry. Much of it has been in vernacular. So that is the type of wife I have. The Youth League was founded at the request of Dr. Toma as the chairman of ANC. And then the first person he asked to do so, to help him, was Peter Raboroko. Because Peter Raboroko at the time was running one of the largest, in fact it was the largest student organization, the Johannesburg Student Organization. By the way, my wife was the treasurer of that organization. Now, but later on, of course, there were came in Mandela, Sisulu, and Tambo. Now, Peter Mda and Lambete, we can say now they were the theoretician, not necessarily the founders of the Youth League, you see. Now, Mda was teaching at the Roman Catholic school in Orlando East. And then Lembete joined in much later when he had come now for his articleship for becoming a lawyer under Dr. Pikai Seme. But now Lembete is the one who gave it now when he was elected. That is now the president of the Youth League. He is the one who gave it now its policies, philosophy, and ideas. And they worked closely together with Mda at that time. And they issued a lot great deal of literature. And so they left their mark on the organization. So most of the ideas of the organization emanated from their joint contribution. The ideas now of the Youth League now was that now, well, to discard questions of collaboration with the rulers, to abandon the program of petitions. And remember, our forefathers now believed that now they could petition and use sound argument, and that now their position, the white men would regard them now as civilized. You see, at that time, I might point out that way that now the Africans believed that now if they could be educated and be civilized as a white man, then there would have been no objection. They would now be entitled to get the franchise, which was really a wrong concept. You see that? And then, of course, they rejected the leadership of the ruling class, especially the liberal class, and they encouraged African nationalism. Most importantly, of course, of all of these other things, was that now, that is now the leadership of ANC at that time had abandoned the program of action, that is of 1948. And that now was a grievous, what if I might use the Christian name, word, sin against the sensitivity of the Youth League, because that program was the program which was hashed out by the Youth League. So if you went against that program, it meant therefore you challenged them. It was a red flag, placing before a bull, and then it brought the matter to a close, you see. And so that was the most important reason for the Youth League or PAC to be founded. Now, there is this question of the Freedom Charter. I'm not going to elaborate on its history, but now it came as a result of Dr. Matthews. You see, he is the man who suggests a Freedom Charter of some kind. But instead, we had this document now, Freedom Charter, which was not known the person who drew it up and where it came from. And then the ideas too, well, were in fact were fickle, if I might put it that way. They were weak. I mean, they were not clear. When they talked of the country, the land belonging, South Africa belonging to all, and so on, and all that thing, which was against, of course, the ideas of the Youth Leaguers, because they knew that South Africa was a colony, and a colony which belonged to the indigenous people. And then they talked also of multiracialism. Now, we do not, and we did not, and we still do not believe in racism. We believe in one race, the human race. So we rejected that idea. But they continued to talk of multiracialism. And then, of course, the Freedom Charter, if you read it, it expresses that idea of multiracialism. Even today, I may say that now some people talk of non-racialism, but if you study the way closely, what they mean is just that now to use the word non-racialism, but now to cover multiracialism. It is now multiracialism in a new code, attractive code, because their ideas now is that of consociationism, which still means white domination. Well, the way we ended, of course, It was a question of why we broke away from ANC. Then we said that the straw that broke the camel's back was the breaking of the conditions of the program of action of 1948. Now, our first campaign was the status campaign, as you say so, which came earlier, from 1959. You see. Now, this status campaign was now to bring or to make people now have confidence in themselves and discard the fear of the ruling class. And then that was the first campaign. And then I must say now, this status campaign is always continuing because it has to do with the educating of the mind and making people conscious of themselves. The status campaign was introduced by the president, by our late president, Robert Sobukwe, who explained it clearly what it was meant for. He actually meant what I've actually told you that now. It was to make people gain confidence in themselves so that now they could produce strategies and programs which they themselves will carry out independently. Then, of course, after status campaign, there came the first important campaign of PAC, that is now the PAS campaign of 1960, of March the 21st, 1960. Now, that PAS campaign, of course, was directed mainly, to get rid of the notorious PAS laws, which were harassing our people, which the enemy was using it now to divide and to make people, or to create fear among the people. You see. And then that PAS campaign, therefore, its first aim was now to remove the fear of prison from among the people, because the oppressors used prisons, to keep down the people. But now if people now could now offer themselves freely and go to prison, they would conquer that fear. And then, as the president said now, it was going to be a non-violent campaign. And, well, of course, he made a long statement on non-violence. And, in fact, he called upon his followers to observe strict non-violent measures. But unfortunately, as we all now know, that day, because of so many people who responded to the call of the PAC against the PAS laws, people were massacred at Sharpeville on that date, leaving about 69 people dead and many scores wounded. Now, this was in spite of the fact that these people were unarmed and were just staging a peaceful demonstration against PAS laws. And the idea of the campaign was that now they should offer themselves to nearest police stations for arrest and leave their passes at home, but not to destroy them, but just leave them behind, because it was calculated now to be to free them mentally, because even destroying that document, if you had not discarded, you see, the mental respect for it, it would be meaningless. So that now you leave the document at home because it meant nothing. So I'm making this point now because some people started talking, they talk of banning passes. That was not the campaign. The leadership, of course, of PAC felt bitter about after Sharpeville because now they had, in good faith, undertaken their campaign to be conducted under non-violent conditions. And then when their following were massacred in that fashion, they were convinced that now non-violence now had no place in Azania. That was the first thing. Secondly, the banning of PAC meant very little to us because we realized that now if they could act in that measure, for innocent people, against innocent people, well, banning was not going to stop us from continuing with our struggle. And then, as a result, of course, we were thereafter able to raise one of the greatest guerrilla army. Now, remember, it was not only banning, there was also the state of emergency for the first time. And many people were arrested and detained without trial for the first time in our country. You see that now? And also the passes were suspended for a short while anyway to try to appease the members of PAC and the African people. And there was a great flight of capital, especially the British capital, because it was the one which was dominating in Azania at that time. For the first time now, the white people realized that now they were not so almighty. And it also brought this among the Africans that now it was, the possibility of defeating the white regime. Now, PAC now formed one of the largest, and in fact I think it is the largest so far, internally, even externally, that ever existed in Azania. But that one was 100% internal. That is PAC guerrilla, which was called Poko. Poko, you see. That, well, I'm supposed many people want to know, what does that mean, Poko? It comes from the Youth League members who used to call themselves that Dingum Africa Poko, which means that now I'm a pure African. Now that Poko means pure. So that now people they adopted that name Poko and gave it to the guerrilla at that time, guerrilla army at that time. And then this guerrilla army that is engaged in the government now, forces, that is the army and the police, at various theaters, Kamatak and Bashi, Queenstown, and many other areas, that is PAL, and the results there, of course, were that now there was great panic among the whites at that time. And also to such an extent that now the government was forced to call a commission, and then that commission was conducted by Judge Snyman, which recommended, all these bad laws, so that now all these laws that we have today flow from that commission of Snyman. In the 60s, we had the pass law. Do you see that? This time now, we had this grievance, which we could easily exploit. Do you see what it meant? You see, which was popular among the people. Now, it is not an accident that synchronized with the first now APLA. Previously we had Kopoko. Yes. APLA's now action in Gwavuma. Remember now, APLA's action in Gwavuma 1975, where we were training now, we trained internally, guerrillas now. No longer now the panga ones. I mean, we're using spears, and not spears, I mean, homemade weapons. But now these now, we're guerrillas now who are being trained internally now by our guerrillas now who came from overseas. And then that student now action now coincided, synchronized with now the first action, internal action of APLA. Well, I suppose many people will say it was a coincidence when we leave it at that to see. So that now, and then of course, it's a well-known history now that we were the only party, or except the Black Consciousness, who were charged and sentenced for the uprising of 1976. Some of us now, because we were involved there, we don't even enjoy talking about that incident because it wasn't a pleasant incident to start with, where we were faced now, not only with the police against us, but the judge himself, was obviously on the side of the police. And then there it was absolutely made secret, so that now the judge and the police, used to do certain things which in open court could not be done because they would be challenged.
What kind of things?
Things like telling what the police should do, leading evidence in favor of the police. You see that the judge now cross-examining in such a manner that the witness must showing that now he wants the witness to answer in a definite, certain manner.
But didn't they have another motive, like giving no publicity to the people?
Yeah, well, of course, that is now insight. Of course, the motive, of course, was that, again, not to give PAC, because we're the only political party, and it was going to be patent that now, that case actually disclosed that now the culprits, the people who brought about, that is the 1976 uprising, was PAC. And yet, it suited the liberals to say that it was a spontaneous action of the students, as it suited them in 1960 to say that now it was just the masses in Azania who just rose against the past laws. As a result of all this bad treatment in prison, some people died because of diseases, out of malnutrition and so on. Now later on, of course, some of us now, we were sick as we are, and even found ourselves now having TB, and which we are surprised that it was not detected until recently when I was outside. And then, of course, I had this tumor. I did not even know that I had that tumor when it was discovered now recently when I was in Johannesburg prison, because I didn't feel any pain. The only sign which I had, I was really, it was a question of obesity, that had becoming too fat. My body was very, very fat, big now. But now I was glad that now people in Johannesburg discovered it, and then of course it was removed by operation. But now still I did not feel well until I had to ask that now we should have further treatment First of all is that there is progressive forces in the international world should support the struggle of the oppressed. And they must be seen to do so. In the first place, they must do it as one. You see, their duty is to encourage those who are engaged in the actual struggle internally to fight their struggle insofar as they are concerned together. So they should avoid tendencies which can help to divide the struggling masses, for instance, in Azania. And it is not the duty of the international community to decide the form and nature of the struggle in Azania. That is the task of the Azanian people. Equally, it is not the right or duty of the people, or however friendly they may be, to decide who ultimately will win that struggle. And it would be naive to think that in a big country like Azania, there will only be one party or one group which will fight for the liberation of that country. Otherwise, it would mean, therefore, that now we are contradicting ourselves. We are admitting here that insofar as the struggle is concerned, then there should be totalitarianism, only one party, one person, and whatnot. You see, no longer democratic thinking and no free thinking of how the struggle can be best won. People can't see the problem from the same point of view. So it is false for anybody to claim to himself the right to know who is now the correct one. Now, so this sectionalism, especially when it comes from those who think are assisting the struggle, is abhorrent, and it should be discouraged by all means. Now, I would come to the positive side. The struggle requires many things. First of all, it requires moral support, which many countries and many progressive forces have been doing. It requires material support, financially and otherwise. Well, many groups have really donated and put their hands into their pockets to assist the struggle. But unfortunately, this aid somewhere has been abused, because there had been tendencies which have come about now that this aid now is controlled by certain sections, especially those sections which believe that they can interfere directly into the affairs of the struggling masses. But the ordinary man in the street in Europe and in Asia has done his best to assist the liberation movement by collecting the money. But that, I'm afraid, has been abused sometimes by the very liberation movements. Finally, now, I would say, we go beyond material interest. The struggle sometimes requires you as individual. Sometimes we expect that some people somewhere will be with us. That is now when the very fact that you have to give yourself into the struggle. Do you see that? Now, because Azania requires that. So we are saying, especially to the Africans in diaspora that come forward, it is your battle or it is your liberation struggle, come forward. Come be with us. And we don't only need you now, but we need you afterwards because you have got the skills. Now we say to the progressive forces, come be with us. We need you now and we'll need you during the period of reconstruction. Thank you. Yes. Now I think now, well, I will put it now in the words of our late President, Robert Sobukwe, that now we are fighting for life and life in abundance, which means, first of all, we want people to live, increase, and be many. Secondly, that now they must be well provided for. That is now, all the resources in the land must benefit the people of Azania. And then that is economically. Culturally, they must now have the opportunity of improving themselves culturally. That is now developing their, first of all, customary or innate culture of the country, indigenous culture, and then enriching it with the contact of the culture of humanity as a whole. Economically, then, we are going to have a socialist order. By socialist order, now we mean socialism in its true sense, where there will be equitable distribution of wealth. And we believe that this can only be attained if it is guaranteed and its custodians are the people who believe in it. That is why we say now, even after liberation, workers and peasants will be in the vanguard to see that now freedom is consolidated and that true socialism is established based on the material condition of Azania. To talk of whether it will be like that of Russia or China would be a falsity, because those countries did not develop their socialism from a vacuum. It evolved from the material conditions which existed in Russia in 1917 and which existed in China in 1949. Is it 49? Yes. So that now, even in Azania, we will have a socialism. I mean, socialism now, in the true sense, still remains that is propounded by Karl Marx. See that? But now it depends on different conditions, how it will emerge and be applicable. And socialism, again, does not necessarily that now it must result in bureaucracy or totalitarianism. You see? And I'm glad that now our late president foresaw that as early as 1959 when we established PAC, and how true it is today that even people like Gorbachev and people in China have recognized that now you cannot ignore the developments and the improvements and the entire human enrichment which capitalism per se has brought into the world. It is a system which has been brought by people. So it can't be absolutely be bankrupt of good things. But today, they are the ones now who are doing exactly what our president said. He said, we shall borrow from the East and the West, and we shall take the best and develop our own social order.